That's quite a leap. I want to go back before we talk about the Land Institute some more to your mention of your book, Man and the Environment, and how you came to put together that collection of interesting readings, very diverse, from Yeats to Jackson.
Yeah. Well, I was fresh out of the South and the civil rights movement from 64 to 67 in Raleigh.
Where you were getting your PhD.
Where I was doing the PhD work. And one day I saw and heard Martin Luther King, and at the same time a Ku Klux Klan demonstration.
All on the same day?
All on the same day.
Rather impressive.
And, of course, the South was still very much segregated, but civil rights was a big thing. Also, the Vietnam War was heating up. And then it was a time in which students were calling for relevancy. They said we need to be more relevant. So I came back to teach my classes at Kansas Wesleyan, teaching the general biology class, students wanting more relevancy, so I promised to weave in more relevant material. I'm not sure it was entirely a good thing to do, but anyway I did it, and so I clipped and I tore and I Xeroxed and I filed, and there was this emerging stack of materials that had to do with population, resource depletion, and environmental destruction, pollution. So it seemed as though there was the makings here for a reader. And so William C. Brown approached me, or I think they approached me. Yeah, I believe they approached me, and so I came out with Man and the Environment, which I was told, I didn't know at the time, was about the first environmental reader. I'm not really sure if that's exactly right, but at any rate, it sold pretty well. And but that made me more of an environmentalist, say, than a geneticist, although my passion was still genetics. So that's what got me hired at Cal State Sacramento.
On the strength of Man and the Environment?
I think so. I think so.
Did you have a text there, or did you use Man and the Environment?
I used Man and the Environment, and then it went into the second and third edition, and I just got tired of it, and I think people that was enough. They didn't need any more of that kind of reading. Also, I was involved in the Land Institute by the third edition.
Was that a concept, an idea that came to you in California then, the Land Institute?
Well, no, not really. When I was in Kansas, on this sort of leave to see what it'd be like to do a homesteading trip, but at the same time hedging, so that I could drop back into the university.
Keeping your options open.
Keeping my options open. I've done plenty of that, or tried to. It came to me as my calling to be a teacher, or isn't it? And students, it seemed to me, were given more to minimal compliance than spontaneous elaboration in the university. And it seemed as though they weren't really getting into doing anything about the problems. So I thought, what would be, if my calling is to be a teacher, what would be the optimum kind of learning environment? Well, number one, a classroom or a learning environment in which they're not graded. What grades did was not give a student the opportunity to fail. That is, you would give them a B or a C, but they had never really come to terms enough with the subject matter, so that their work was really too shoddy to be either useful or artistic. So I thought, no grading system, and no tests, but that if we could collaborate on some common problems, then in a way, if they would be letting other people down within the classroom. In other words, for instance, as it's turned out, for instance, we're doing this research at the Land Institute. Students are giving experiments that they're to do. They've got to weed and water and pollinate and harvest and gather the data and analyze the data and have it available for publication. And what that does is and they're all cooperating on the different experiments, so that the pressure is coming from the whole group,
from the community,
rather than the industrial model where you got the professor up front, the students arranged in rows out there, and they're only answering to him or her. We give no certificate at the Land. They're coming to a school of thought, so to speak. So they are there. There's a selection process of those that are not oriented toward the credential. And it seemed to me that this is a sensible kind of educational experience. Now, you can say, well, that's fine for you. You've got your credentials. And I'm not saying they should not go on and get credentials, but I also think that it's valuable to people that are willing to interrupt their credentializing process and do something that doesn't credentialize, but that at the same time enlarges the intellectual life and ties it to the real physical world where they actually are doing work.
Failure in that community under those circumstances would be a very different ballgame than getting a low grade on a report card.
Right. Failure is, see, one of the things I noticed as a coach is that when I was coaching sports is that those that were involved in the sport, whether it was track or football or basketball, seemed to be throwing more of themselves into that than when they were than in the classroom work. Well, their exams were weekly in public, and there's something about that that is to constantly having people exposed to a larger world than just what's on the test. Students writing papers that are for exercise versus papers that are to be published. The mind is concentrated in a fundamentally different way.
To be aware of the audience.
Right.